Hello everybody and welcome to episode 12 of Board With Each Other, the board gaming podcast that reviews games through the lens of playing them as a pair, whether that be as a couple, with a good friend, or with a fellow punk that you're trying to while away time during the apocalypse with. I am joined as ever by my lovely wife, my co-host, and my player too, Hannah Kelly.
Hi guys.
And before we crack on with what we're doing today, for those of you that listen to us regularly, you'll know that we are a monthly podcast, and this is podcast number 12, which means it's podcast anniversary. So
no way!
Happy podcast anniversary!
Happy anniversary!
So today we are going to be looking at Radlands, and in contrast with a lot of other games that we look at quite regularly, this one is strictly a two-player game. So those of you that are familiar with our scoring, obviously one of our scoring categories, the scalability won't count in this sense, so we're just going to NA that one. But aside from that, this will be a normal review. So Radlands is a card game, and it is basically a simulation of two rival Mad Max adjacent style. You've just listened to our podcast on Nemesis, I imagine, our previous one, and it's a similar kind of thing. This is Mad Max, but it's not Mad Max because that would be copyrighted. You don't want that. And you play as rival gangs who are fighting over the wasteland, and the object of the game is to destroy your opponent's camps, of which there are 3. How the game is played is it's played on a 3x3 grid, so 3 columns and 3 rows. At the bottom of your bottom row, as it were, comprises your 3 camps, and these are dealt out randomly at the start of the game. There's a whole bunch of them. I think there must be about 30 or 40 of them. But you start with 3 camps. All of these camps have abilities, and they also dictate how many cards you start the game with in your hand. Above those camps, you can play people. So you draw people cards. They cost you the resource, which is water, of which you get 3 every turn. You can play people or punks, and as Hannah loves to say from all the cards,
people are punks too. Oh no, punks are people
punks too. Punks are people too. And they basically, you use them to either defend your camps. You can't usually damage a defended camp directly with other people, but they also do other things dependent on the card. To the right-hand side of this 3x3 grid is a events track. So you play certain cards in the game that are events, and they will have a little number and a bomb icon on them, which tell you what position to put them in the track. And then at the start of your turn, your events advance 1 until they reach 0, in which case they go off. There's also instant events, which start with a 0 that you play directly from your hand and take an immediate effect. Probably the most important of these events is your Raiders card. That starts on position number 2, and when that goes off, it damages one of your opponent's camps, whether they are defended or not, of their choice. Once it does that, it goes back to your hand, and you need mechanisms either on cards or from elsewhere in the game to put it back on the table and restart it. On the other side, you have a water tower, which you can spend 1 water to pull into your hand, and in later turns you can play that card to gain a bonus water for that round. So particularly sort of some of the late game cards, if you will, some of the really powerful ones cost 4 water, so you need to plan ahead if you want to be thinking about getting one of those out. When your people come into play, if they are not usable that turn, quite a common trope in sort of battle of card games. Anybody who played Magic the Gathering will be familiar with summoning sickness, similar kind of concept here. And all the abilities on all your cards can only be used once per turn. And you denote this by putting if you flip your water tokens over, there's a little minus counter on there, you pop it on there. And that's basically how the game plays. You draw 1 card per round, so I would say in terms of card economy, or cards that you have in your hand, as far as games go, this one tends to be very low. You'll quite often only have 1 or 2 cards in your hand, so your options tend to be quite limited. You can spend 2 water on your turn to draw a card, but as the economy goes and you only have 3 per turn, that is quite an expensive proposition. You can also discard cards directly from your hand to have an effect which is basically listed on the top left of your card. So you could discard a card to damage a person, you could discard a card to get your Raiders back out, and those are completely card dependent. So it's always an interplay of whether you want to actually put cards permanently down on the table, or whether you just want to trash them for their
trash value.
Instant trash value, as it were. And that basically sums it up.
It's worth noting that theoretically, There are cards that allow you to do differently, but theoretically you would need to damage the people in a row before you can hit the camp, so you'd need to wipe out that row. That's not always the case, but I mean, in general principle. Generic punks can only take 1 damage, but your people cards, if you like, can take 2. But the first time they take damage, it means you can't use their special abilities. They essentially just become meat shields.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah. When a card becomes damaged or injured, in the case of a person, you turn it sideways, tap it, for those that are familiar with that terminology, and they are essentially unusable until you either heal them or they take another damage. Punks are a mechanism in the game. You can get punks, and if you do so, you have a shared you draw deck in this game. You don't have separate draw decks, but basically you take the top card from the draw deck without looking at it and you place it directly face down, because the reverse of the card is a punk. If that punk's destroyed, you don't discard that card, it goes back on the top of the draw pile.
Which is fun.
Yeah, it's an interesting mechanic. And you doth proceed till one person's camps are destroyed.
All 3 of them.
Yeah.
Games can take... it's a quick game to play.
Yeah.
We've had games that probably last about 15 minutes, but we've also had games that are over in like 2 turns.
Yeah. I think on the box it says 20 to 40 minutes. I've never played a 40-minute game of Radlands. I don't know how that happens. I would say the vast majority of games run at about 15 to 20 minutes, I'd say. You do get the odd one, which is just a steamroll right out of the gate. I'll get probably a bit more on that later. In which case, you just start again, really. But yeah, I would say 15 minutes on average is about right, I think, the way we play.
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of where this one came about, I think this was one I just saw a little bit of buzz about. I think it was a Kickstarter originally that came to retail. I might be wrong on that, but I just remember seeing people sort of raving about it as a 2-player experience, and I picked it up. I like any sort of Mad Maxy type theme things if it's in with the aesthetics I like. So yeah, it was an easy one to go for, I think.
I think what's really interesting about this is, from what you've said, again, you're the expert, not me, it's used quite heavily on a tournament scene because of the balancing in it, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah,
but also...
I'm not so sure about a tournament scene. I think it's quite a competitive game, and I think, like games nights, a lot of people do play it quite competitively, but I don't know about the richness of a tournament scene. Don't quote me on that. It feels like the kind of game that could have that, but I'm not entirely sure that it exists.
But also there are no plans to release any expansions. It is what it is.
Yeah.
It is one box, and that's your lot. And I actually kind of admire a developer that's so proud behind the product they put out. Like, this is it. We all might twiddle with the rules a little bit, but it is what it is.
Yeah, Daniel Piechnik, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, Daniel, if you're listening, is actually quite active on the Board Game Geek forums, and he said on a number of occasions that he has no intention to expand this at all, which in this day and age of constant expansions and bloats and Kickstarters, I really respect that. I like the fact that there's no, I'm just going to drop this incredibly well-balanced game and I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah, takes a lot of balls, and I think it's a really great thing.
I really respect that. Yeah. I really respect that. Yeah, so anything else you want to sort of run through before we get onto our scoring? I'm conscious this might be a shorter episode than usual because it is quite a small box game, as it were, considering, last time we did Nemesis, but...
No, that's it. Let's get into scoring.
Okay, all right. So let's crack on with the review then. So do you want to talk us through the first scoring category?
Yep, so our first scoring category is components. So that thinks about the actual components that you get in a box, also table space, set up, strip down, those sorts of things.
Yep. I mean, I will say it right off the bat. I just wish every card in every board game was printed on the cardstock that they use for this.
Oh, it's delicious, isn't it?
It's really nice.
It's got slight bumps to it, so it means that when you shuffle it, you've got a bit of texture. So when you shuffle it, there's grip to it, and they're quite thick. And I have to say, when you go back and then shuffle normal cards, you can feel the difference. You taste some difference in reverse.
Yeah, it feels definitely... the cards feel quite deluxe, don't they? I don't know how else to explain that. I mean, as far as components go, there's not a huge amount there. You've got your cards, you've got some standard cardboard counters. There's not really much else to talk about. But I do think the card quality is really up there.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about the artwork because, I mean, you said it, it's set in a post-apocalyptic, Mad Max, Borderlands-esque kind of artwork that is absolutely stunning, but also quite niche. I don't know that I've seen other games with this kind of
that look to them. I think I've seen bits and pieces out there, but it's very punky. It's very vibrant.
The game,
but obviously less sort of cel shaded, and I don't know. It reminds me of almost sort of your more like left field comic book artist kind of thing,
and even colour schemes that go with it as well. They're really stand out, and really iconographic actually.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it very much leans on that sort of Mad Max Fury Road vibrancy. I think one of the things that was so amazing about Fury Road was all the colour and vibrancy and madness that it brought to that world. Post-apocalyptic worlds can be very grey and brown, whereas this is anything but. It's very colourful. The colours really pop, and everything just looks really cool.
And what you were saying was actually that was a design choice from the publishers or whatever, and I think it absolutely was the right call to make. Absolutely brilliant. What I would say is, if I had to find a critique, the cardboard counters are fine.
Yeah.
They're fine, but they're fine.
There's so few of them that I feel like they could have done something with resin, something a little bit more...
Or even just wooden ones, because I'm all about sustainability and stuff.
Yeah,
but,
true,
I mean, it's a really small nitpicky thing.
Oh, yeah, we're absolutely splitting hairs, one thing I will say about the components, I'm not going to mark it down because of this, because I bought the retail copy, but I do know the Kickstarter, I think the deluxe version of the Kickstarter, came with 2 playmats, with obviously your rows laid out and borders and your tracks and everything. I wish I had those, because that would just make the experience even better. I think it obviously once you get used to it, it's fine, but when you first start playing it feels very sort of abstract.
Yeah, we had real problems with the water towers and the raiders,
where everything goes and what have you, and the rules are not super clear about where your water tower's supposed to sit and all that kind of thing.
Although largely it's relevant, to be honest.
It is largely irrelevant, but I didn't know when we first read the rules. It's like, does this actually take up a spot on one of the tracks, or so I mean, it's one of those things that I think if the version with the playmats came to retail, I probably would have gone for that one in hindsight, but I don't think it did.
But what I think is also amazing about Radlands, it is just a deck of cards.
Yeah.
But we've reviewed other games that are also just deck of cards. This does not hog the table.
No.
You could absolutely nip down the pub after work, get it out of your bag, because the box is tiny.
Yeah, it's really quite small.
And compact, and you could have like an evening playing this without issue, and that's why I think this is quite special.
Yeah, this is the ultimate, like, if you're going to go and see somebody who might like it, you could just pop it in your bag, and which I have, and whatever playing surface they've got, it's really easy to crack out. You haven't got to worry about a board. You don't need space as such. Worst comes to worst, you could just sit on the floor and play it, kind of thing. It's one of those games. So all that is absolutely great. I've given it a 9 because I have very little criticism to bear to it. I think it's a really nice package. I love the way it looks. I love the way it feels. It's great. Yeah.
Again, also gave it a 9. It's the artwork for me. I just think it makes it absolutely stand out. So, well done.
Great. Okay.
Right, so our next category is complexity, and so when we talk about complexity, we're not talking about necessarily whether it's very, very complicated or whether it's not. It's more how well do the rules and the level of complexity suit the actual game itself. We also think a little bit about analysis paralysis, which is my big bugbear, and also how much we argue about rules. As with most card games, I'd say the devil is
on the cards.
It's on the cards itself. However, I don't think we've really had to query rules on cards all that much.
No.
Maybe once or twice.
The rules that you're getting on cards, I mean, even if you compare it to something like Marvel Champions, you're not even getting a paragraph of text. It's usually an icon and a cost or one sentence.
Do you damage to a person? Do you damage to a camp? Do you damage to anything? Destroy something? It's really quite straightforward, and you've got a nice little handy reference card that tells you what each of the icons do.
Yep.
And therefore, I think it's really quite easy and straightforward to pick up.
Oh, most definitely. In terms of complexity, it is not a complex game. I think there's a huge amount of depth.
Yeah.
I think, for me, always the key with games that are simple and easy to learn is the depth needs to be there. And I think in this case, it absolutely is. I think it's... the amount of interactions and strategies and combinations and everything is enormous. But in terms of teaching somebody, picking it up and playing it, it's dead simple.
What I will say is it's very, very luck-based.
Yes.
So everything is random, you know, from the base camps that you were initially dealt with to whatever punks come or people come into your hand. It's all entirely at random. And so, yes, there's an element and a level of strategy within that. You know, you have to deal with cards that you've been dealt with. It is very, very random. Do you really like that?
Yes, I do. And I think there are probably ways that you could cut that down a bit. I think you could introduce, and I imagine there's already rules out there for this, because I imagine some people have done this, but I think you could do things like some sort of draft for your camps, because as the rules as written go, you just each get dealt 3 at the start.
And there's no mulligan.
There's no mulligan, you just get dealt 3 at the start, and you have to deal with what you've got. I imagine if you were playing this in a more competitive way, you would implement some sort of drafting mechanic there, where you draw like 10 cards and you go back and forth choosing which ones you wanted. But that's not the way we play, and I'm fine with that. I like the randomness of having to deal with whatever the game throws at you.
I also think because there's very little reading involved, this is also a really good game if you've got a language barrier at the table for whatever reason.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that.
Because you've got symbols that pretty much tell you everything, so you don't have to read the cards.
It's icons and numbers for the most part. Yeah.
Which is probably the first game like this that we've reviewed. So
yeah, it's not purely so, but even when there's text, it's fairly
light.
Yeah, it's fairly light, fairly simple,
and probably good for kids of an age where they're just beginning to learn to read and can start thinking about sorts
potentially.
Of things.
So I mean, I think in terms of how far the complexity suits the game, I think it's fine. I think it's perfectly fine. I think half of its appeal is it's not brain burnery in the way that you need to sort of figure anything out. It can be brain burning in the way that you play and the strategy that you adopt. I think you can end up in situations where you really have to think your way out of them. I think there's often times in our games I'm like, I really need to stop and think about how I'm going to get out of this hole that I'm in, or how I'm going to capitalise on the hole you got yourself in, kind of thing. I think it's a game that, if your opponent's playing decently well, punishes mistakes quite badly. I find if you do something wrong, you don't tend to get away with it because it's a very tight game.
But I think that's the other flip side of it, isn't it? Sometimes it's not about you playing badly, or it's not about you making mistakes. You're so heavily luck-based. I've seen it with you, that you've drawn nothing but either radar events or whatever, and your hands are tied, there's nothing you can do, and you're leaving yourself wide open. And I think that's where I would rate it down just slightly. I think I would like just a tiny little bit more strategy out of it.
Fair enough, yeah. I mean, what I think is quite unusual for a card game like this is obviously there's no deck building. You have a shared deck that you both draw from. So it's not like you can build a deck around anything or go for a certain combo. It's very reactionary. You have to deal with the hand that you're dealt. And yes, you can use water to draw cards, but using 2 water on a turn to draw a card is a desperation measure, because that is most of your turn next, basically. Yeah. From my perspective. And we've had about 11, 12 plays of this, I think.
Yeah.
And there could be something I'm missing there. Maybe that is a viable strategy, because again, there's always that discard mechanic where you can trash cards for their cost, and sometimes that 2 water for an instant potential injure or damage could be worth it, I guess. And I'm not sure. Okay, so how would you rank on complexity?
So I gave it an 8.
Yeah, ditto. I gave it an 8 as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Fine. Okay. So shelf life and value for money. So this is how long we expect to be playing a game for, how much we'll come back to it, and value for money is what it says on the tin.
So I suppose a good starting point is how much does it retail for?
So this retails for about 20 quid, which I think is bang on. Absolutely bang on. I have no qualms whatsoever with the package and quality that it is paying that for it.
Yeah. I think what's great about this is you've actually got so many different combinations. Like you said, your stack of base camps is probably like 30, 40 cards. Yeah. So whilst we have drawn the same base camps, we've never had the same base camps all in a row twice, and it changes your playstyle very much. Even which ones you choose to defend, which ones you're quite happy to give up. And I think for that reason, it's definitely got a huge amount of replayability there in terms of like the actual experience and the different cards that you get.
Yeah, and I think There's something about not being able to deck build and having that joint deck and that randomization, which I actually think extends the shelf life, because there's no meta. You can't look at it and go, oh, I've solved this.
But it's not even that. It's deck building takes effort. So one of the things about deck builders, Marvel Champions is actually quite good for this compared to other deck builders, is that before you even start playing, you've got to spend a huge amount of time building your deck, and that becomes and that eats into your play time. And it's not. Some people will love that and have fun, but if you're playing it as a social game, that becomes a problem because you're sat there looking at all of this, stripping all your cards out, etc. You have none of that. You just go.
You just go. It's a lifestyle thing as well. I mean, we've mentioned before that we have a young child, and I mean, back in my Magic the Gathering days, I'd happily sit there for 3 hours crafting a deck. I just don't have time for that anymore.
I mean, I definitely spend 3 hours crafting a 300 thick.
Well, you just found as many bears as you could and put them all in a deck. It's not really deck building. But it's one of the things that gets me a bit about Marvel Champions these days is, like, I want to sit there and build an incredible deck, but I just don't really have time. And we've got time. And
Marvel Champions is the best or better of the deck builders for that.
If we've got time to play a game, I don't want to sit there in silence building a deck. Anyway, we digress, but I think it is something that massively extends the shelf life of this for me. I think I often ask myself the question when we do this category, like, do I see myself in 5 years still going and pulling this off the shelf?
Absolutely, 110%.
Yeah, absolutely.
What I do think, and again, let's own it, we both veer on the heavy end of war games. We like games that take several hours and complexity and depth, and so for that reason, does it scratch that itch? No, and I think because of that, it means we don't get it out as much, perhaps, as other games, but it's also, where does it fit in our rotation? That said, you're absolutely right, in 5 years we will still be bringing this out. Yeah,
because you want to have a quick 50-minute, 20-minute game or something,
and it's so easy to teach.
You're there.
It's really easy to teach. It's it's definitely something you can take with friends.
Well, one friend.
You have more than one friend.
No, but it is a two-player game unless you really want the other people to just watch.
That's how I roll.
We're getting into weird territory there.
Anyway, how did you rate it? How did you score it?
I scored it a 9.
Really? So I scored it a 7.
Oh, really?
Mainly because when we first played it, fell in love, absolutely loved it, and yet we've still only played it 12 times.
Yes, but I think that's more about us than it is about the game. And I guess when I'm thinking about value for money and shelf life, 20 quid for something that I do see me putting off the shelf for years and years and years is a 9 to me.
Yeah. No, I don't disagree. I just think it's that.
I can't foresee myself ever becoming, because it is so random and there's so many combinations, I can't see myself becoming bored with it. It's more about how it fits in.
Yeah, see, and maybe I can.
Yeah,
and maybe I can, because whilst the devil's in the details of the cards and whilst the base camps will change, it is still the same game. There's going to be no spicing it up or anything like that. Whereas I feel like Magic, for example, which is not a good comparator, it's a very different game. There is,
Okay, alright, fair enough. I stick by it.
Yeah, I stick by mine. We'll agree to disagree.
Fine. Well, it's not that much of a disagreement.
Yeah. 20 quid, it's exceptional value. Like, it's good.
Okay. Is it any fun, though?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know what else I want to say about this.
It's fun.
It's really fun because we have had these games where I have just literally decimated you in 2 turns, and it's been really satisfying. It's also, we've had games where there's been a real slog behind it, and I've had to really fight and really work. And we've turned things around as well. So I just think
it is a game that even if you
swings.
There are swings in this. I don't think there's anything else quite like it in that way, because I think most of the games that we play, I mean, realistically, once you get about 3/4 through the game, you kind of know who's going to win.
Yeah.
Not this.
No.
I have been in games with you, where it looks like somebody is absolutely spanking the other person.
Usually you.
I mean, I lose most of our games, full disclosure.
Yeah, you feel like you're absolutely giving me a hiding.
And then you just come back and you just swing out of nowhere, and the next thing I know, I've got 3 destroyed cramps and the game's over.
Yeah.
it is a game that has these really big, satisfying swings, and I really think that plays in its flavour. It's one of those games that you are never out until you're out. Mm-hmm. I think there was one game that, I can't remember who it was either you or me, that had a camp, one half-destroyed camp left, the other person had 3, and they came back to win it.
Yeah.
And it can happen, that's great. I think it's just an exceptionally fun time when playing. There's a lot of decision space, but there's also not. So it's easy to play, but you also
quick.
It's quick and snappy. It's easy to play, but you also feel like you are being tactical, and it feels like your decisions matter, which they do. I think most of the good games that we play, we do have those games that one person just steamrolls the other because of luck and card draw and stuff, and I actually rate it down a little bit because of that. Because I do think there are some balance issues there, particularly with your initial draw of camps. You can draw a bit of a dud to start with, not because the camps are useless, but the camps, as I said at the beginning, denote how many. They also denote how many cards you have in your hand. And I played one card. I can't remember one game, should I say? I can't remember whether it was with you or with one of my friends, but we drew 3 zeros. Which means we had that person had no cards in their hand whatsoever to start the game, and that is just it's too much of a hill to climb.
Maybe there's a ball balancing issue in that, I wonder.
So that marks down slightly for me, but I mean, at the end of the day, if that happens, it's over in 2 minutes, and you just restart. Mm-hmm. You just restart, and when you get into the thick of it, you have these pivotal decision points in the game that go back and forth, and every game you can look back and go, oh, there's like 2 or 3 points there where that really could have gone either way.
And I think, so, I talk about mana conservation, so like, the way in which you use resources, or water conservation, so how do you use your water? There are a huge amount of options that you have on the table, so whether you use your water to use your base camp abilities, whether you use your water to get out new punks or peoples, whether you use your water to use special abilities, and actually that can be really, really difficult to balance. And I think, quite often my temptation is I want to get all my punks out, I want to get all my people out, have a huge amount of like defence, and then I'll start using them. But actually, if you do that, you can miss golden opportunities. So it's thinking about how do you balance that, and that's. And
I think our play styles are very different, because you like to build a board state in this. I don't. I get.
And you trash cards.
I trash cards.
No, don't trash a card. That's expensive.
I trash cards like nobody's business, because I just go, I can do that immediately, so why don't I just do that? And whether that's right or wrong, I think none of those are wrong. It's just about when you choose to do it, which is what I mean about the sort of pivotal moments and decision spaces. You almost, at some point, you lean into something really hard, and either works or it doesn't. You don't get trapped in it because you haven't got a deck built around a particular mechanic. But because you may decide with what's in front of you to go, right, I'm just going to do this turn and go really hard at it. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but that's the beauty of it.
It is, and I think for people that don't like luck and don't like that random element, this will be really, really hard.
Yeah, I would say if you don't like luck in your games, avoid.
And if you don't like reactionary, so like very much dealing with the current board state and what you draw, like this is probably not the game for you.
Yeah, if that sounds like you, if you are no luck heavy Euro gamer, this is a 2 for you.
Yeah.
I would absolutely avoid, but I love luck in my games. If you've listened to our previous podcasts,
it's the only way you win.
Yeah, it's the only thing that puts me on an even keel. Wait until the Terra Mystica episode, mate.
So I scored an 8.
Yes, I have also scored an 8. Wow, this is the most synergistic we've ever been.
I don't think so.
No,
I think I think we often score things the same. No. Painfully so.
No, okay, fair enough. No, couples in it. Okay. So, as always, we add all of our scores together and average them out, and that gives us a general rating of 8, which I am very pleased about.
I'm pleased about, slightly surprised, but yeah, it's a really solid game.
It's a great game. It's an absolutely great game, and I think if you look at it through the lens of what it is, very easy, transportable, very quick, easy to play, 2-player game, 8 is the score that I would give it. It's great. It's not perfect, but it's great. It's really good fun.
So let's then move on to our 2-player rating. So ordinarily we have 3 categories within this. We're going to NA, the last one, which is about scalability and FOMO, because it's only designed for 2-player.
Yeah, we always do that with 2-player only games, don't we?
Yep. So our first category then is table talk. So So when we're thinking about tabletop, we're thinking about the amount of dead time, so time you just sat there in silence.
Yeah.
Also thinking about getting to know you, so getting to know how the other person works and operates, etc. What I would say is that there is a fair amount of conversation discussion, so you're narrating what you're doing and also, explaining. You did this to me the other night. You were like, I do this, and this, you get 3 damage, that one's dead, and I'm like, whoa. Slow it back. Explain to me what you're doing. And as you talk people through the cards, there's often quite a lot of discourse and discussion.
Yeah, and also it's a very sort of fighty, competitive game. Which I think is great. It's very much attack the other person. I think there's almost a dearth of that in our collection. There's not that many.
Head.
That head to head. I am literally trying to beat you by destroying your stuff, which I really like. I mean, I was a Magic the Gathering player for years. Really loved it, and it's the one game out of a collection that gives me that feel, that sort of duel aspect, but a very in-your-face duel, and with that comes a little bit of trash talk and jokiness, and there's that element of I really like.
However, I don't think the trash talk is as much with other games that you mentioned, like Magic the Gathering. I'm also going to potentially suggest Ares Project, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Mainly because it is very quick. There is less thinking and downtime, so therefore I'm less committed to my characters and my punks and my people.
You're
and
not
my
attached
camps.
to what's on the table.
I'm not attached in the same way.
Yeah.
These are even my expensive guys. I know that they're not going to last long.
No. There's no super rare you'd be building to for 10 turns to get it out kind of thing that you get super attached to.
So my trash talk is perhaps less in that sense. But
fair enough. But I think that interplay and that interactivity of it is great. I mean, you can't. It's not a solo game you play together kind of thing, which you see a lot of nowadays. It is very much reacting to what your opponent is doing constantly.
Really good date game, actually. I mean, not first date. No.
That's how you find the one, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
I said Netflix and chill, but I actually meant Radlands. Sit down, please.
But it would be a really good date game, I think.
Yeah, it would be. And I think you can find out quite a lot about somebody by playing something like this, because you'll find out if they... they're okay with that sort of conflict-based play. You'll find out if they get a bit sulky when their stuff starts to disappear. All sort of things that you'd like to know in another sort of fellow board gamer if you're playing with somebody regularly. And I think the interactivity of it is great. And like I said, it's very reactionary. But the good thing about reactionary games are that you have to deal with what your opponent is doing. You can't just sit there and build an engine. You have to actually constantly be battling somebody. So as a duel kind of game, there's so many 2-player variant duel games out there. This one actually feels like a duel.
Yeah.
Which I love. So I'm very positive around that, and I've given it an 8.
I apparently didn't score this.
I've scored.
But I would agree with an 8.
Okay. So on to our second and this time final category, competitiveness.
Well, I mean, you kind of just put hammered the nail on the head.
Yeah, that's the right one.
Yeah, good.
Well done.
It's definitely that there is no confusion about the fact that I am attacking your camps, I am attacking you, I'm getting rid of your peoples and your punks, because punks are people too.
Yeah.
And that level of competition is really there and apparent, and it's nice. There's no competing for resources in the same way as perhaps other games.
Your resources are always there. I mean, in that way, it kind of reminds me a little bit about Hearthstone, the video game.
Yeah,
if you've ever played that, it's like you always have this constant pool of resources. You know they're going to be there. It's not like Magic, where have you drawn a land? Do you have them available? They're always there, and obviously you can pump that up at the water tower.
Or other cards.
Other cards will do the same. Provided you get a good draw off the start, you both get a good draw in terms of camps, then it is an incredibly tight, tense, competitive game.
Yeah. And it can flip on a knife's edge.
Yeah, as we mentioned before, those big swing moments are fantastic, and you're never really out until you're out.
And being able to claw your way back from imminent death is really satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely, it's amazing.
And you can, because actually, as long as your camps haven't been destroyed, you can use other cards' abilities to be able to restore them. So you literally can be 3 camps half damaged, and literally pull yourself back to full health if you get lucky, and if you're
lucky,
and that's really cool.
Yeah, it is, and that's what a game like this should be. You should never be out until you're out, and you're not in this. You are absolutely not. I've seen the proof of that so many times.
Yeah.
So it is an incredibly competitive game. When it is, there are the moments. I mean, there's a certain part of me that'd be like, this would be a 9 or a 10 in competitiveness, but you get those, you get those card pulls that just mean somebody's out through no fault of their own. They are just out, and that has made me mark it down slightly.
However, I kind of feel like, and maybe there is a rule that we've just not seen, like maybe it's an updated rule around being able to mulligan, because most games like this have a mulligan function. So maybe there is a mulligan function and we just don't know about it. And I think if a mulligan function, then that would kind of...
I think a drafting function would fix that. I think a camp
I don't want to draft. I think the whole beauty and the amazing thing about this is that you don't draft, and that's the point of it. And I think you start talking about drafting, you're changing the way the game works.
Yeah, fair enough.
No, not having it.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I think if you wanted to play this super competitive, but we don't, so that's not why we play it. I think you could do that. One thing that I didn't mention earlier, I probably should have mentioned during the rules section, was I know the designer released an errata. So he released like almost a version 1.5, which cleared up a few rules. Because I think there was something, the rule book is obviously very, very slim, given the size of the box and what have you. I think the 2 main things that came out of it that people were complaining about, that if you're not aware have been fixed, is cards cannot heal themselves. Because I think there was a situation where people could get certain camps that had a heal function and they just kept healing, the camp just kept healing. And the other one was around filling up your board space. If your board space is full, you can discard cards from it and replace them. And that's not particularly clear or even present in the rulebook as far as I understand. So people thought they got locked into something, and once they were locked in, people were just kind of leaving them locked in and then winning the game as a result of that. So those things have been fixed. So if you come across any of those issues, I definitely recommend giving the errata, which is available on Board Game Geek, a read, because it does fix a couple of the potential non-competitive elements. Why I wanted to mention this section. But yeah, overall I gave it an 8. Like I say, it would be a 9 or a 10 if it wasn't for the occasional bust game.
Oh, I know, but that's also really satisfying as a player.
Not satisfying for the loser, though. It's no fun for the other person.
Also, I disagree, because there's nothing you can do about it. Like, you can't think your way out of that one. Like, it's just a win for the winner. Yeah, but you have
a very chill, pragmatic approach. Some people will find that quite difficult.
Okay, alright, fine. But anyway, I also scored it an 8.
Okay, well.
So, I mean, we don't have to do the calculations. Our 2-player rating is 8.
So you have an 8 and an 8. So a fantastic little package, fantastic board game. Really highly recommended.
Fantastic little package.
I'm going to leave that one in there. So on that note, thank you very much for listening. Until next time, thank you to all of our listeners that have been on board the last 12 months. We really appreciate you listening. We really appreciate your support. It means a lot to us. We do this just because we enjoy it, and the fact that everybody out there actually listens to us is really endearing, and I hope we've managed to sort of guide you to some new purchases, and you've enjoyed listening to our discussion. We intend to carry on as we are, really. But yeah, until next time, be good to each other and play lots of board games.